You've done a really interesting analysis of some big brands like Glossier and Outdoor Voices, and you talked about the curse of capital. Can you give us like a quick synopsis of what that means and what like it means for those brands?
Yeah. So the curses of capital is kind of a phrase I use to refer to the startups that have raised so much capital in an environment that was maybe easier to fundraise in, or maybe they were seeing enough traction and hyped up enough that investors were willing to pour a lot of capital into those brands. The curse of capital is when you have all this venture capital and you spend it too aggressively on things that actually end up making you more fragile as a business in times of shock to your business, or in times of sort of like tougher fundraising conditions. So, for example, if you Outdoor Voices is a good example. They raised, I think, something over $60 million or something. I would have to double check that, but they raised a good amount of capital, especially for an apparel startup. For a tech startup, that would be a very normal amount, but for an apparel startup in the time span that they did, it doesn't necessarily have to be too much. But the fact that they ended up losing a ton of money, their losses were a lot bigger than they actually even projected year to year. That meant that it was too much, and they spent it too much, and they spent it on things that didn't actually fortify the foundations of their business, such that when they had trouble raising, they were in trouble. And it was, it was a situation where they really had to completely kind of pull back uh, and figure out how to adjust in a way that was really disruptive. And that's an example. Another example would be Fast, right? A startup that's been in the news lately. They raised, I think, like over $120 million in the span of basically 2 years, and they just closed down. How do you spend that much money that fast? They raised hundreds of them, or they raised over $100 million, hired hundreds of employees, and were making 600K in revenue last year.
That's
That's
great.
another example of how when you raise a lot of capital, paradoxically, it can actually put you in a tougher position because it's hard to be disciplined and restrained about how to spend that, because it's much easier to be exuberant and optimistic when all the investors are throwing money at you. Everybody's saying that you're going to be the next billion-dollar company, and then you lose sight of how to be disciplined about that budget. And so you put yourself in a position where you have to raise an even bigger round just to survive.